So in last night's videos, I set these two classes up for you, roster and student. A roster is a list of students, just like in real life. In my grade book, I have a roster of students, and I have a student array here to represent that called my list. But let's knock out the student class first. It's much easier. A student, for our purposes, just has a name, so a string field, and a grade, an int field, an instance field. Okay, and the constructor, only one kind of constructor is called from the client, and that is the initializing constructor. Let's go over the client real quickly here. When I make a student, I always do it the same way. I make all these anonymous students up top. There's two of those. I've got these two anonymous students, and they're used with a constructor. They're made with a constructor that has a string parameter and an int parameter. And there's no other way a student is made, always with a string and an int. There's no student made over here, for example, with an empty parenthesis default constructor. So we just initialize those fields to parameters. My name equals name. My grade equals grade. Okay. And then you saw in the directions that when you display a student, you just show the name and a comma and the grade. So my name plus a comma, put a space there, plus my grade. Let's make sure that compiles. All right, so that class is all done. Okay, that's no problem there. That class is a pretty basic class. I'm sure most of you could at least get most of that done quickly. Okay, now we have to do our roster class, and this is far more involved. Okay, even the constructors are, the first one is kind of weird. We make a roster two ways. We make roster R1 with empty parentheses. That means we're calling a default constructor. We make roster R2 with a constructor that gets a student array. So we have a default one and a student array one. Okay. The default one's kind of weird. Okay. Because you can't play around with my list unless you complete the instantiation and you can complete the declaration. So my list equals new student, and then you have to give it a size. You can't just do that. Okay, if you just do that, it says missing the dimension. Okay, missing a size. So what size do you make it? Well, it's silly, I know, it's silly looking, but just make it size 0. That'll work. If you make a roster with empty parentheses with the default constructor, that means you want to add to it later. And when you add to it, you'll increase the size of that list, of that array. This one's more commonsensible, makes more sense. We just say my list equals. All right, now we have the add method and the toString method. The add method, I think, is very tough, and the toString method is a little weird. Let's do them one at a time here. So I wish you'd pause now. If you haven't done it yet, I wish you'd pause and try and complete these 4 steps I have outlined. Okay, because you need to struggle now so you don't struggle on Friday's test. So the first direction says create a temporary student array with size 1 greater than my list. So I'll go student temp equals new student, and the size is my list length plus 1. So 1 greater than my list. Okay, see I'm doing okay so far. Compile it, no errors. Okay, step 2, copy everything from my list into the new temporary array. Okay. And then put the parameter stu that this add method gets in the last position of temp. Okay. And then finally, set mylist equal to temp. And now mylist is one bigger than it was, and it also has that stu in the last field. Okay, this toString method is almost so simple as confusing. Okay, you want to display all the students in my list, one per line. So loop through my list again. And we're building the string and returning it, so the out.print line over here of R2 or whatever one it is, R1 there, whatever one it is, can display that string. So S plus equals my list of I. Now that is, to me, and probably to many students, a weird looking line of code if you think about it. Because on the right side, we're saying a student is being assigned to a string. But since the student class has a toString method, Java uses that toString method to put it inside S, to build S. And then if you want to do them on separate lines, put a new line character. And then everything works. Okay. Let's see, roster client, good, run it. So R1 has Brent Smith, then we add Kevin Wang, and then R2 is given these guys here. Okay. Now I wouldn't be at all upset with you if you didn't quite understand this and put dot toString and thinking you had to explicitly call the toString method, but you don't. It does the exact same thing. You don't need to, because again, it's got the toString method.